Right, so we are going to start the last session of the day. We have Gregor Bransky with us, who will be speaking about the Commons Stewardship Initiative. So Gregor, please, over to you.
Thank you. Welcome to my talk, which is a request for comments on public benefit stewardship. I hope that everybody can hear me and I'm having this mic close enough to my mouth. Great. So this is probably going to be one of the more interesting but also slightly boring talks, because I'll try to talk to you about the interesting world of member states, tax law, competition regulation in the European digital single market, and what all that has to do with open source software supply chains. Fun, right? Also, I am not a lawyer. As a general disclaimer, I'm a mathematical physicist by training. I have no idea how those people think. I'm trying to make layman's judgments. Let's start. So the open question is, if you have digital commons, and you take the concept of stewardship, which is people taking care of things to make them grow, the question is, how can you actually do that, especially in the European Union in the context of the Cyber Resilience Act? So we're going to look at the following questions. What could public benefit stewardship of digital commons look like? What are the open questions in getting there? And why might the answers lie in the Cyber Resilience Act and in the Digital Commons Consortium? So let's start with what the fuck is public stewardship of digital commons? Digital commons like open source software, open data, open content collection, and open educational resources are, I assume, the digital commons which are classically known to everyone around. Then, because it's new and hypey, we have open AI systems. And some of us who might be more, I would say, fundamental on the cause could also agree that open services should be considered digital commons. So what would a public benefit stewardship of such a digital commons look like? An open source an organization could commit themselves to providing reliable long-term maintenance of open source software. An organization could commit itself to verifying data like open data. Other organizations could commit themselves to verify content, especially in the open content collections and the open educational resources. And then you could have trustable AI models, for example, hosted by academia, so those running them could actually be aware of what's going on inside them. And when it comes to open services, we might like to have open services without tracking or public algorithms for content delivery, so maybe we don't kill our democracies by social media disinformation campaigns, and also don't make people hurt their mental health when using them. So all of this would be really nice to have, right? The question is, why don't we, and what are the open questions on the way? So first of all, there is a certain legal question, which is, if you have a digital commons and you have a unified European digital single market, how do you tell whether or not an organization is actually a company that's in competition with other companies, or if it's just people doing something for the public good? You could see the difference, like what's the difference between the equivalent of a restaurant and a soup kitchen. So that's an open question. And the second open question that you have is that public benefit is a term from tax law. And we do have tax regulation in every member state. It's not a European question. And if you look at said tax regulations, there's an interesting challenge on how to get tax regulations which are handled differently in every member state in alignment with the digital single market, because it might become a competitive advantage if one member state decides to just consider everything public benefit stewardship and others actually have built an industry on top of it. So the question is, how do you operationalize that and how do you get that working? If we look at said open questions, let's start with the first one. How could you actually look at the digital commons? What could that have to do with the digital single market? So let's start. The Cyber Resilience Act might hold the answers. Lo and behold, the piece of legal legislation we all come to love and hate. The Cyber Resilience Act defines two economic operators, which are A, manufacturers, and B, open source software stewards. You have heard about those for quite a while now, I believe. So manufacturers are defined as natural or legal persons who develop or manufacture products with digital elements and market them for payment, monetization, or free of charge. Within the Cyber Resilience Act, as you could see in the last talk, there's a lot of regulation coming down manufacturers' ways. They're preparing for that. I believe they're ready. They might not be, but things will turn out. And then there's a new entity defined, which is the open source software steward, which is a legal person other than a manufacturer. I have been told from a legal perspective that's an interesting soundbite here, because it's actually a legal definition that's not constructive but based on a complement that is apparently not common in legal definitions. They systematically provide support for free and open source software, and they market them for, well, that should be payment. That should be free of charge, and payment and monetization should have been crossed out. Apparently, something went wrong with the layout. I apologize for that. This will be fixed in the slides when they're loaded up. Thanks to the European Commission, we actually also have a way to answer the question whether or not an organization is an open source software steward following a flowchart. At this point, thanks to the team at the European Commission providing us with flowcharts that actually nerds can read. Within that, there's this one question: are you a not-for-profit organization? And if you are a not-for-profit organization, they allow you to get some money by accepting either contributions, like people writing code for you, membership fees, or donations. The price you pay to be a not-for-profit is that you pay your staff reasonable living expenses by European standards. Whatever that might be is an open question we're looking for an answer forward to. So if you look at that, then you will come about a specialty of European law, which is quite interesting, that there's a difference between not-for-profit organizations on the one hand side and public benefit organizations on the other side. There has been a study that has been published by 2023 by the Libre Committee of the European Parliament about public benefit status and CMD systems for associations and non-profit organizations in the EU. And herein we find a wonderful statement, which is that the public benefit status exists in all European national jurisdictions, and public benefit organizations must be distinct from other categories of organizations, such as non-profit organizations and social economy organizations. They're a very special animal, but they actually serve great gains to society. For example, most of homes that take care of the elderly, or childcare services, or public schools are public benefit entities, as well as certain research institutions, associations taking care of the preservation of culture, various other things you can imagine. The Red Cross would come to mind, disaster relief actions, all those things. So, really, you want to talk about taxes? I mean, why? What does this have to do with open source software supply chains? I mean, people pay taxes. That's what companies do as well. Well, so some of us might remember that there was a time where people wanted to start an AI company for the good of humankind. And it's going to be open source, and it's going to be available for everyone. And that ran for a while. And then someone said words like, the decision to transition OpenAI from a nonprofit to a for-profit, ... So if you actually want to trust your open source project to stay an open source project or a digital commons project and not just wait until you're depending on it and then go commercial, trust might be an issue where you could use some help. So what's the big difference between not-for-profits and public benefit entities? Not-for-profits are accountable to stakeholders and members. They allow for collaboration between organizations to the limit of antitrust law. And they can become neither a standards nor a verification body, which is rather important to other aspects of this discussion. And then there are public benefit organizations, which are accountable to stakeholders and members and are under oversight by tax offices, because if they derivate from being a public benefit entity, the tax office is going to come for them. What they are able to do is limited to public benefit and general interest activities. Donations they accept are bound to the causes they're proclaiming to serve. And they're best practices when it comes to research and development, standards and verification, to actually have public benefit entities be a place of innovation and collaboration across various sectors of society. So to sum up the most relevant part of this rather technical summary is public benefit organizations are accountable to parties who do not take part in their governance. And this is a really relevant difference between a nonprofit or a public benefit organization. If a nonprofit wants to go commercial, just its members do have to agree. If a public benefit organization wants to go commercial, they have some explaining to do. So our proposition that we would put forward for request for comments is that we have to define some kind of condition which then would make an open source software steward a public benefit steward. Then probably a public benefit open source software steward, but we're just borrowing the legal concept here and we're trying to apply it to other digital commons. So then the second open question you remember is, how do you operationalize this? Well, so the big question we have to ask is, how does an open source software steward basically graduate to become a public benefit steward? And there you have the interaction of various levels of national tax law that have to interact with the European digital single market. That's going to be fun, right? Also because all those digital goods are usually known to just be used by your neighbors and not be spread over all of the European Union by this thing called the internet. So maybe there's an organization around which is the Digital Commons EDIC launches to advance European technical sovereignty, where it basically states that there is now an organization since the 11th of December last year that creates a common European structure dedicated to digital commons. It brings together public administrations, open source communities, and companies to pool resources, support strategic open source components, and accelerate the transition from isolated pilots to shared scalable digital infrastructure. Well, isn't that jolly? So there is an organization out here who actually claims to be doing public benefit work with digital commons. So far, it's limited to member states. I believe if they're doing their job well, they should actually serve the societies of this continent. So the idea would be that we come up with some conditions for digital commons and what public benefit stewardship of said digital commons means. Then you can apply to the DCEDIC to actually see that you fit this condition. And then if you do, your tax office can get informed that you actually do fulfill that condition and don't wreck the digital single market in the European Union. And then you become a public benefit steward. Isn't it marvelous? OK. That being said, because this is an RFC session, I'm looking forward to a lot more debate because the rest is rather brief. If we would get that done, and we could get European legislators to move forward to do this, we might find that FOSS communities actually get the legal recognition of the work that they're doing, because at this moment, everybody who's doing something to contribute to society is recognized as doing something as a public benefit. This is not true for open source projects. Open source projects no longer would have to develop hacks to work around the tax code to get actually recognized as public benefit organizations. With quite a few European public benefit organizations, we can see that they have made themselves into community support organizations so that the communities that they support can take care of digital stewards. But actually, the organization itself is not on an institutional level responsible for the digital commons. There are few exemptions left and right, but that fits to most of them. And donations could actually become an income stream because larger corporations actually have trouble, especially the publicly traded ones, to just give money away to an open source project. But what they can do is they can donate to a public benefit organization that is bound to follow a cause, which is a different thing when it comes to accounting. Tiny things, I know, fun. Industry. Industry could profit from having more reliable software supply chains by actually having a way to shove money down this open source software project throats. Relevant services could be provided to SMEs that might need them. A public example would be that I admire what Google did with Let's Encrypt, but I believe it would be great if you could have a service like Let's Encrypt running by a European entity and just provide a service that everybody needs. Industry would be able to actually invest in software supply chains because they would encounter legal entities that they can actually interact with. And you could get to what you can call permissionless innovation, which is an interesting concept when it comes to the idea of technology transfer from research and development or open collaboration to actually have a way to get innovation running in a way that actually fits the pace of digital developments. Because the classical way that's usually done in the European ecosystem is writing research grants to apply for research projects together with a university leads to the fact that your project can start about a year after you wrote your grant. And I don't know about you, but when you look back a year when it comes to digital development, I'm not entirely sure if you would have been able to make an educated guess what would be the project that you would like to start working on today. For academia, this would allow to follow what is called the third mission of academia. Next to research and teaching, transfer is mostly listed as the third mission of transfer universities, and especially university entities could then become stewards of public of open source code, wherein they enshrine their domain knowledge that they have when it comes to software to run models or simulations that they usually develop for their research activities. Also, as we know with most engineering disciplines, academia is known to be an entity that actually certifies the capabilities of technical systems, but we do not have yet any kind of setup to do this for open source code. You can basically take whatever technical product you produce, at least in Germany, and find a technical university who has an institute who really specialized into this stuff. Whatever it is. May it be protection systems against floods, or the question if your screw is actually up to the technical specifications. And with this, I mean like literal screws. Certification is mainly done through academia. We don't have that for software engineering. We should have, I believe. Well, for society as a whole, we would be able to create trusted entities that provide digital services that are needed, like Let's Encrypt, crypt pads to collaboratively work on documents, do things like scheduling appointments, and all the other things that we have come accustomed to as digital infrastructure in our daily lives, but maybe actually maintained and taken care of by an organization that does not feed its revenue stream by making the data of its user a commodity. We could get social media that neither risks democracy nor mental health by opening the algorithms how they show content. And we could create reliable sources to combat disinformation. A lesson Europe has learned by installing public broadcasting after World War II and before, and might be a way to move forward. Oh, and for public entities, all those who are doing work on government digitalization could actually start to work together in FOSS Foundation-like organizations to maintain the code that they're using together. This is the reason why I'm standing here before you, because the Innovation Council Public Health is a non-for-profit public benefit entity in Germany who builds open source software for public health centers. And we couldn't find a legal framework that would allow multiple public health centers across states of Germany to work together on an open source project because there wasn't a legal framework that would allow for it. Jolly fun. Yeah, that's about it. Also, as with every good talk, there's a call to action. A Git repository has been set up on the weekend, and there's also a Mastodon account that hasn't made a tweet yet. But if you want to be updated about this, there are 2 QR codes to scan. Feel free, feel happy, and we'll try to keep you posted. That's about it. And then we have quite a bit of time for questions and discussions and stuff that I left out that were ununderstandable and could be clarified for the people who are watching from the internet. Hi there, by the way. Great.
Any question from the audience? I have.
Juan has a question.
Yeah. You pointed out about force certification, and that's a pretty interesting topic. Especially we have with the CRA the attestations, which are supposed to be something that is harmonized somehow. Do you see attestations the way to go for certification for force, or do you expect something different?
So I believe at this point attestations and certifications are a bit different. I believe that if we make open source software stewards become public benefit entities, that would allow them to generate the revenue streams that they need to have the resources to spend that they need to harden their software. So this is rather speculative, but from what I have seen from Opus 4.6 and rumors I've heard about Mythos, I believe that artificial intelligence quality checks will actually provide the level of quality assurance that we're used to in other engineering disciplines when it comes to software development. And running those AI checks will cost resources. And those will be best spent by the open source entities who actually build the code. And then they can basically put a label on it like, we ran IT security hardening tests on this code with the following model, and we spent that amount of tokens. So then those who can use it after them can discern whether or not this is a sufficiently reliable security attestation for them. And I think that their public benefit status of open source software stewards might be very helpful. Thank you for that. What I meant when it came to certification is that in academia, we do have research institutions who harbor in-depth knowledge to a degree where it would not sustainable in any economic way to amass it. If you talk to a chair that works on, let's take flood prevention systems. They're actually research chairs who do research on how to do flooding prevention systems. Those chairs also have a test bed where you can bring your technical component and have it tested to see if it actually fulfills what would consider to be state-of-the-art or necessary by research to use it as a flood defense system. And I believe when it comes to open source projects, and you have chairs who, for example, do research in empowering people to make database decisions, this would be a way to allow them to actually certify software publicly so that the rest of society can rely on the fact that, for example, an AI model or a simulation software has been tested by a third-party entity that does not have a commercial incentive in screwing the certification they just gave to the software. So that part was more about software doing what it's actually claiming to be doing and not hardening the code in itself in a quality way. Did that help to tell those two apart?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. Do you see any friction or challenge between being both a public steward and a public goods steward and perhaps a manufacturer? That one entity might hold two distinctions or two identities at once?
I believe that should be mutually exclusive. Because if you're a public benefit organization, you are in this idea, subset of a not-for-profit. And I believe that there will be no way to reconcile the conflicts of interest that you have between a commercial entity and a public benefit institution. And I believe that at certain places, we need those public benefit institutions to take care of the very infrastructure that we want to build an open digital ecosystem upon. Just to get me right on that. I do not mind if people write good code and fund a startup and become stinking rich over it. That's not the point. This is not a cry for communism, so to speak. The idea is that in certain instances, we need, as a modern society, organizations that provide institutionalized trust. And I believe that public benefit organizations are the way to go there. Because as we can see from the current open source ecosystem, even though basically every modern company runs on open source code, the open source ecosystem is tremendously underfunded. And if you're not forced to, any commercial entity will not go ahead and go like, oh yeah, but I like this one open source project. I'm going to donate like the $500,000 that they need to run, €500,000 that they need to run. So I believe we need like those entities. Does that answer your question and the reasoning why? Great. Thank you. Any further questions?
No? All right, so Gregor, thanks a lot.